So another question that I got is that people ask me, when you say you mix everything yourself, so you mix the whole movie? No, I do not. I mix the score. So let me tell you a little bit how that process works. So I mix all my music, and I'm here in my studio, and I feel like it's sounding great. Then I have to print stems. And stems are individual layers of sounds that belong together. So you would have everything that sounds really low drums, everything that sounds mid drums, super high drums, metals, crashes, all your strings separately, all your brass separately, the woodwind separately. Break up the synthesizers in a bunch of different food groups, the sound design instruments in a bunch of different food groups, maybe some special effects, whatever. And sometimes you end up with a lot of stems. For Mad Max, we had roughly 60 stems per cue. So that's quite a lot. And these stems, when they play back at the same level, and you call that with the technical term at unity. So if all these stems play back, let's say at 0 dB, you would hear my mix. Now, what happens with the mix of a film, you go to a studio that's called a dubbing stage. So in the film world, the final mixing is done what they call at the stage, not a studio. It's called the stage. And it's actually a theater, pretty big sometimes, with a massive mixing control, and you see the film like full resolution on a really big screen like you would see at any theater that you usually go to, with a full-on theater sound system. And in there, we have a few people that are working on the final product of the film. And the mixers that actually mix the film are called re-recording engineers. And you have somebody that is responsible for all the dialogue, and that person usually does the music as well, but sometimes there are two different persons. And then there's a person who is responsible for just the sound effects. And then there are some other people in the room too, which are the sound effects editors. So they're sitting behind a Pro Tools rig where all the sound effects are playing back in sync with the picture, and they can make last minute changes if the director wants so. And there's a mixer, the sound effects mixer, that they work with constantly to make sure that everything is working perfectly and it sounds perfect. Let's go to the music mixer. And a guy I've been working with over a number of films, and he's a wonderful, wonderful mixer, Chris Jenkins. He won an Oscar for Fury Road, very well deserved, together with Greg Rudloff, who was responsible for the sound effects. Wonderful team of mixers. So Chris was responsible for the music for Mad Max and also for the dialogue. On that side of the room, we also have a dialogue editor, who is somebody that edits all the dialogues. So that person, he or she, would take out certain breaths, or would make certain things louder or certain things quieter, would see if there is a better take for a certain sentence that's being spoken by an actor. So it's very important that works really in sync with the mixer. And there's a music editor. I'll get to music editing in a separate answer, but that person is there. And in the case of Fury Road, it was Bob Badamy, which has become a really good mentor for me. He's older. He almost looked over me as a father to make sure that my career was going smooth, and he taught me a lot of secrets of the industry, and he's really looking out for me. Plus, he's one of the best music editors there is in Hollywood. So he was the music editor on Fury Road, and he's sitting there to make sure that the music with all the stems are working perfectly to sync to picture. Now, I would like to mention what the scope is of this mixing desk. It's humongous. It's insane. It's almost like a city block in some cases, and there's so many channels and so many faders, and the inputs on these desks, there's so many of them. Some desks have the capacity to go up to 800 or 900 channels coming in, and they're all being treated individually. So 60 music stems will end up on this board, and they will be treated individually by the music mixer if he feels it needs tweaking. So let me tell you how this works. If there's a scene where there's a lot of talking and I made music for that specific scene, even though I take notice of that, but I'll talk about it in a different answer. And if the music mixer feels that the frequencies of the music are getting in the way of the dialogue, he would find some of these stems that have frequencies in them that are fighting with the dialogue, and he would tweak those frequencies a little bit so the dialogue becomes clearer and the music kind of sits around the dialogue. This can take forever, and this is a very painful process for a mixer to fix this. On Mad Max, I forgot how much it was, but it must have been anywhere between 10 and 20 weeks of mixing, just mixing the final product. And the same goes for the sound effects. The sound effects mixer on Fury Road, Greg Rudloff, was constantly tweaking the sound effects to make sure that it didn't get in the way of the dialogue, or they were very impressive when you needed to feel them, or they were not getting in the way of the music, or vice versa. The music was not getting in the way of the sound effects. And what was really interesting with the process with Fury Road, and this is because of the mastermind George Miller, that he was so steering the process that he knew perfectly where the music needed to be the upper hand, where the sound effects needed to have the upper hand, and the dialogue needed to have the upper hand. So it was constantly this really nice mix of going in all these different qualities of the film. So and that resulted into what it became. So the mixing process is quite elaborate, the final mixing process of the film. And I always love to be part of it whenever I can. Usually that's not the case, because composers usually say, I want the music to be louder, which is obviously, that's why I make music. But I'm not that type of composer. I go in and I change my head around, and then I become a mixer too, because I love the technical aspect, and I work with the mixers to make sure, like, okay, maybe the music, maybe we should take the music out here and just make this like a sound design moment. And then other moments I would suggest, what if we made this a music moment and the sound design would disappear? Obviously you can only discuss this with the director, because he's the one that needs to give that order, so to speak. But it's a really interesting process and amazingly fascinating. It was one of the things when I got more and more into film scoring that really captured my imagination, the mixing of the final product. Just so to answer the answer really short, when you mix, do you mean you mix the whole film? No, I just mix the film, I just mix the music, and then I go in with my stems to the dubbing stage, the studio, that's how it's called, and then the re-recording mixers are actually finishing the film. I hope that answers it.